lecture. Just a couple reminders for all of you. First of all, please make sure you're writing down the things that show up on the screen. And also remember, if I say something more than once, do something in your notes that is going to remind you that this is something important and you probably should remember it. Okay, so we are going to start out with reasons that the English colonized in North America. There were many reasons for the English to travel to America to settle. One reason was profit, in order to make money. Another one was economic freedom. So the people who owned most of the land in England were the wealthy, and tradition kept the wealth, or kept the land in the wealthy families. And so poorer people were not able to own their own land. But in America, common people saw this as an opportunity for them to be able to own their own land. And this was a huge draw for people to come to America. Owning your own land was a big draw to come to America. Owning your own land brought people to America. The opportunity to own land brought people to America. Write that down in some way. Another reason why people came to America, to the 13 English colonies in particular, was for political freedom. During this time, the English had forced King John to sign the Magna Carta, but King James I and King Charles I, who are the kings during the colonial period, were trying to get power back for the kings and queens in Europe, or in England. So to escape from royal power, Englishmen traveled across the ocean to America because it was an option. Religious freedom. This is very important. Religious freedom was a unique reason that the United States of America ended up getting settled. Religious freedom was a uniquely English freedom. And we're going to see as we move through this chapter why a lot of the colonies were founded had to do with people coming for religious freedom. Back in England, the main church was the Church of England, and everyone was required to attend the Church of England and pay taxes to support the Church of England. No other churches were permitted, but if you came to America, you could be Roman Catholic, you could be Methodist, you could be Baptist, you could follow the Church of England if you wanted to. It was up to you. This is a very unique heritage for the English colonies. And then finally, some people came for adventure, but whether you came for adventure or not, you were going to have adventure. It just was a fact of coming to the New World. Very little was known about the New World, and everyone had some form of an adventure, whether they wanted to or not. Okay, now we are going to talk about colony organization. The first thing that you need to make sure you understand is that in order to come to the 13 colonies, the North America, you had to get a charter. And the charter was what contained the rules for governing where the colony would be located and how it would be run. So what kind of a government the colony would have. Please take a moment and write down this definition for charters. Contained the rules governing where the colony would be located and how it would be run. You couldn't come to the New World unless you had a charter from the King of England. Next, we're going to talk about how the different colonies gained financial support. Coming across the ocean on a voyage from England to the Americas was expensive, and there were 3 different ways that colonies were funded. The first way was that a group of investors pooled their money together to create a company, and this is called a joint stock company. we're also going to refer to these simply as charter colonies. So, this type of colony was run like a business. The investors hoped that the colony would generate a profit and that they would make money by putting their money together and sending people to America. Just like a business venture, this was risky, and they were hoping to get a reward. If the colony was profitable, it not only made money for the people who invested in the colony, but it also began to make money for the people who lived in the colony. Remember last week how we talked about how Jamestown was not successful until they started farming tobacco? This would have been really important for the investors because Jamestown and the Virginia Company are one of the best known joint stock companies. So Jamestown was an example of a joint stock company, and in order for the colony to continue existing, it had to have a way to make money. Joint stock companies are one way that colonies got financial support. So we're going to call it, like I said at the beginning, the word joint stock company or charter colony. We're going to use those interchangeably. So make sure you have both of those names written down. The next way that a colony could have money in order to get started was to be a proprietary colony. In a proprietary colony, a charter was given to a specific individual or to a small group by the king. Pennsylvania is the best example of a proprietary colony. It was given to William Penn, and next week when we learn about Pennsylvania, we'll talk a little bit more about this. But for right now, you just need to know that proprietary colonies were given to individuals or groups by the king. Usually the person was wealthy or they had done something for the king, and the king wanted to repay them by giving them land in the New World. Final kind of colony that would be started is a royal or crown colony. Now these colonies were controlled directly by the crown or directly by the king, and they were run and somewhat supported by the king himself. If you look at the chart on page 21, you'll see all of the different colonies that were founded, when they were founded, and what type of colony they were. And you'll see eventually all of the colonies become royal colonies or crown colonies. And we'll talk about how that happens as we move through this semester. I'm going to remind you again, you need to know all three types of these colonies: joint stock or charter colonies, proprietary colonies, and royal colonies. Make sure you study those. All right, now, it wasn't easy to come to the New World. There were lots of hardships. First of all, you needed to survive the ocean passage. If you remember reading about the Pilgrims, a lot of them got seasick on the voyage. So traveling across the ocean was not an easy thing to do. Next, when you got here, there were no houses, there was no shelter already made, there were no crops growing in the ground waiting for you to show up. So food and shelter were two things that you had to create for yourself. And last, you had to deal with the Indians. Some colonies did better at starting up their relationships with the Indians. Other colonies struggled for a very long period of time with their Indian relationships. For example, in 1622, 300 settlers near Jamestown were killed in an Indian attack. That's pretty significant. So, taking care of your Indian relations was very important when you were starting up your colony. All right, there are several reasons why the English were some of the most successful in colonizing in the New World. Obviously, the English were not the only ones. The French were trying to settle and colonize in Canada, and the Spanish were colonizing in Central and South America. But there's several reasons why the British were successful. First of all, they used private companies, and capitalism was used. and there was very little royal control. Like the king, for a very long period of time, the king let the colonies, the English colonies, do what they wanted to do. Next, self-government was very important in the English colonies, and it made the colonies more adaptable to change because the government was close, it was nearby, it was right in the colony, and they were able to make changes quickly and adapt. Other factors that also influenced Britain's success were that they were more tolerant to people from different colonies, different countries, different religions, and there were opportunities for the poor. Like I said at the beginning, everyone had the opportunity to own land, and this was very important. And last, most of the English colonies started along the coast, so if they needed more supplies or if they needed to send things back and forth from England, it was easy for the boats to get to them. So these are all reasons why the English were the most successful in colonizing in the New World. All right, if you haven't gotten this yet, this is important. The New England colonies were settled by those seeking religious freedom. So now we're moving into section 2, and we're going to talk about the different reasons or the different colonies that make up the New England region. So take a moment, write this down. New England colonies, religious freedom. The people who came to the New England region of our country were coming for religious freedom. All right, now there were two groups of people who opposed the Church of England. They were the Puritans and the Separatists. Make sure you know the definitions of these two groups of people. First of all, it's in the names, guys. The Puritans wanted to purify the Church of England. They recognized that the Church of England had some problems, and they felt like change could come from the inside and they could purify the church and get rid of some of the things that they viewed as problems. The Separatists, on the other hand, wanted to separate from the Church of England. They felt like there were too many problems with the Church of England. They were never going to be able to purify and fix the problems, so we might as well just separate and start over and start our own denomination of churches. So make sure you have these two definitions written down. Puritans, purify; Separatists, separate. Very simple to remember. All right, here's a map showing which colonies were the New England colonies, and those are going to be Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut, and New Hampshire. So there are 4 colonies that are going to represent the New England colonies. Maine was not one of the original 13 colonies, and Vermont was not one of the original 13 colonies. All right, I'm going to spend just a few moments introducing the Plymouth colony at the end of this lecture. So, first of all, make sure you keep this straight in your mind. The Plymouth colony was formed by a group of separatists. So they saw that the Church of England had problems and felt like the only way to fix it was to separate. So first of all, they separated by moving to Leyden, which is in Holland. They lived in Holland for about 10 years before they came to America. And they realized that Holland was not the best place for them. Holland was very secular. Yes, there was religious tolerance in Holland, but the children started to become very worldly, and that started to concern the parents. So they said, nope, we need to find a new option. So they valued religious freedom so much that they chose to travel across the ocean and start a new colony. Think about that for a second. Religious freedom was so important to these separatists that they left Europe and the comforts that were available to them in Europe to start out a completely new colony. So they decided to move to the New World. And this group is known today as the Pilgrims. These are the people that we think about when we celebrate at Thanksgiving time. So this group of separatists are known as the Pilgrims, and they're the ones who founded the Plymouth colony. Originally, this group was very, very poor. They did not have the money in order to be able to start their own colony. So they got a group of English businessmen together and they agreed to finance the Pilgrims' venture in exchange for their profits. So, of the 3 types of colonies that we learned about, the Plymouth colony was also a joint stock or charter colony. And that's because the people were really too poor to be able to finance the voyage on their own. So, the Plymouth colony was a joint stock or charter colony. The Plymouth colony was a joint stock or charter colony. Plymouth was a charter colony or a joint stock colony. All right. The last thing we need to cover are the challenges of the voyage. First of all, there were supposed to be 2 ships that came across the ocean, the Speedwell and the Mayflower, but the Speedwell had issues. It was leaky and it didn't make it. So they started out with both the Mayflower and the Speedwell, had to turn back, put as many people and things on the Mayflower as possible, and then the Mayflower started out on the voyage. All of the Pilgrims were not separatists. Some of them were separatists, and some of them were a group called they ended up being called strangers because they were not part of the separatist religious movement. And the people who were paying for the voyage felt like, we need to have more than just these religious people going on the trip. So they mixed the separatists with these other strangers. Now, okay, so we talked about the unseaworthy ship, the Speedwell. The voyage across the sea was very stormy. They didn't pick a good time of the year to travel. October, November, very stormy time of the year to travel across the northern Atlantic. And when they landed hundreds of miles north from where they were supposed to land. They were supposed to be close to Jamestown. In just a moment, I'm going to show you a map and show you how far away they actually ended up. So originally, the Pilgrims were supposed to be in Virginia. They did not land where they were supposed to. The Pilgrims did not land where they were supposed to. The Pilgrims did not land where they were supposed to. But winter was coming. They had to make a choice. They decided to stay where they were at instead of trying to travel south to get near to Jamestown. All right, so let's take a look real quick. Here is where Plymouth is located, and we're going to zoom out. Google Maps, my favorite website. We're going to zoom out. So Plymouth is near Boston, so it's in Massachusetts. This is Cape Cod that comes out around like this. I'm going to minimize this here. And we're going to keep zooming out. And I'm going to show you how far away Jamestown was from where the Pilgrims were actually supposed to be. Move this a little bit. Plymouth, where the red dot is. Jamestown was right down here. Really far away. And remember, winter was coming, so it would have been very difficult for them to try and sail back south to get to where they were originally supposed to settle, which was down here. All right, that's where we're leaving off today. You're going to work on a workbook page now, which is going to tell you a little bit more about what life was like in the Plymouth colony.